Hello, my name is Jack Knives, and I am here to tell you a personal story. A story about possibly the most egregious and frustrating error I have ever introduced, and thankfully also solved. Let's set the scene here. It's June of 2020, which is centuries ago at this point. My production Kubernetes version was 1.17, and I was working on expanding the horizontal pod autoscaling of my cluster. As a refresher, horizontal pod autoscaling, HPA, controls how many running pods you'll have given your resource utilization. In the stable version of HPA, only one type of scaling was supported. So this is what all of the deployed services used in my environment. The beta APIs for HPA, however, allowed either CPU or memory to be configured. This was a pretty exciting feature to be able to offer to my developers, since lots of services would be better off scaling with memory. The CI/CD platform that my team and I had built allowed me to roll out this new change by updating HPA in my Helm chart templates and setting a default value in the universal values.yaml file. The default value I chose to set was CPU. I updated a couple of services with this change to test with, and then the fun began. I checked out my services and noticed that one of them had an unknown where the resource utilization should be. That seemed kind of weird. I described the HPA object itself to dig a bit deeper. Well, that didn't really seem right. Missing request for CPU, but surely CPU is a supported resource? At this point, I double-checked all of my updated configuration and cross-referenced with all the documentation I could find. Was I using the right API version? Yes. Was CPU definitely a valid resource? Well, both the general 1.17 documentation and the API reference for autoscaling v2 beta 2 indicated that CPU should be accepted. According to the docs, I should be good to go, but unfortunately, should can only do so much. I felt that CPU not being supported was not the issue. I was using a managed Kubernetes service, so I decided that that had to be the culprit. At the very least, I needed another set of eyes. So I got on a call with a support engineer and we got to digging. We troubleshot in circles, checking and rechecking every possible thing we could think of. Switching HPA to memory seemed to work totally fine, so what on earth was wrong with CPU? Inspiration struck me. I have a really dumb idea, I said to the support engineer. I'm going to try something. I updated the config from CPU to CPU. And guess what? It worked. 3 days of troubleshooting because this input was case sensitive, except wherever it was mentioned in documentation, it was in all caps. I did actually try to make a pull request to Kubernetes to accept all caps CPU so that no one else would suffer like I had. But after about a year of it repeatedly going stale, I ultimately gave up. I'm sure there's bigger Kubernetes out there to fry anyway. My lesson to all of you engineers out there is simple. Be flexible when it comes to your input and assume your users will enter all kinds of cases, especially if it's an acronym. At the very least, be explicit about what your input actually is. Just because you're end users or other engineers doesn't mean that you can slack on UX. And above all, don't feel bad if the bug you spent ages debugging is the result of a typo. We've all been there. Thank you for watching and listening. If you have questions or comments or confessions, please don't hesitate to reach out.